Begin moving about 10 to 30 minutes after your last bite. If you want one default, aim near 15 minutes, then take a purposeful 15-minute walk. That is the strongest practical starting point. And the contradiction is important. A longer, harder workout performed much later may improve your fitness, but it may be less effective against the glucose rise from that specific meal than a shorter walk performed while the curve is still climbing. The meal still matters. Pizza and a chicken salad do not create the same glucose challenge. Portion size, carbohydrate amount, fiber, protein, fat, food processing, your starting glucose, your medication, and your own insulin response all help determine the size and timing of the rise. Movement can blunt that excursion. It cannot erase the meal, guarantee a normal reading, or turn dessert into broccoli through the power of optimism. Metabolism is flexible, but it is not gullible, so your immediate objective is narrower and more useful. You want contracting muscle available while glucose is entering the bloodstream, not an hour after the opportunity has largely passed. Once you finish eating, two curves begin to compete. One represents glucose appearing in your circulation as the meal is digested. The other represents glucose leaving the circulation and entering tissues that can use or store it. If you remain seated, the second curve depends heavily on insulin and your existing metabolic capacity. If you move, contracting muscle adds another route for glucose uptake. Timing changes which curve gains the advantage. In many healthy adults, glucose peaks roughly 30 to 60 minutes after the meal begins. In people with type 2 diabetes, that peak is often delayed and may occur between 60 and 120 minutes after eating, although mixed meals can shift it considerably. Fat and protein may delay the rise. Refined carbohydrate may accelerate it. Gastric emptying, medication, sleep, and the size of the meal matter as well. That is why 15 minutes is a practical target, not a magical second on a stopwatch. Researchers do not always start their clocks at the same point. Some measure from the first bite, others from the end of the meal. In ordinary life, simply note your last bite and try to begin moving before 30 minutes have passed. Beginning around 15 minutes usually places muscle contraction inside the rising phase rather than after the crest. Waiting until 30 minutes may still help. Starting at 10 may work better for a rapidly absorbed breakfast. Your personal peak may be later, but reacting after a high reading appears is different from activating muscle before the peak develops. The reason muscle has so much leverage is scale. Skeletal muscle is the largest insulin-sensitive tissue in your body. Under strongly insulin-stimulated laboratory conditions, it can account for roughly 80% of whole-body glucose disposal. Estimates following an ordinary mixed meal can be lower, but muscle remains one of the major places circulating glucose can go. That changes the purpose of your post-meal movement. You are not trying to burn enough calories to compensate for lunch. 15 minutes of walking does not burn a dramatic number of calories anyway. You are changing the immediate demand for fuel inside a large amount of tissue. At rest, most GLUT4 transporters are held inside the muscle cell. Think of them as transport proteins waiting away from the cell surface. Insulin binds to its receptor and sends a signal through a route involving PI3K, ACT, and a regulatory protein called TBC1D4. That signal moves more GLUT4 toward the cell membrane, allowing glucose to cross into the muscle. Muscle contraction creates a second signal. Energy use and calcium changes inside the working muscle activate pathways involving AMPK, TBC1D1, and related proteins. These signals also move GLUT4 toward the cell surface. The two routes are distinct enough that their effects can be additive. Contraction can continue stimulating glucose uptake even when insulin signaling is impaired. But insulin independent does not mean insulin is irrelevant, and it certainly does not mean a contracting muscle has unlimited capacity. It means you have another access route, and you can activate it voluntarily by moving. This connection between meal timing and metabolism is personal for me. When a specialist found my husband Tom's brain aneurysm at 57, it pushed us to re-examine his health together. We gradually changed his meal timing, food order, movement, and sleep, and we believe that journey changed everything for him. The Noon Reset protocol grew from his health problems and the transformation we built together for him. It is his 30-day guided meal timing system designed to gradually move eating later toward fasting until noon. If that structure would help you, the link is below the video. Now, back to the movement window, because after 60, the amount and quality of muscle available become part of the decision. Muscle mass commonly begins declining during middle age. Broad estimates suggest an average loss of around 8% per decade through the years, leading towards 70, with faster losses reported in later decades. Those are population estimates, not a sentence handed to every individual man. Training history, protein intake, illness, hormones, sleep, inactivity, and body weight can move you far above or below that average. Muscle quality changes too. Some human studies have found lower GLUT4 expression in older fast-twitch muscle fibers, although not every study finds the same age difference. Research comparing selected young and older groups has also reported roughly 40% lower mitochondrial oxidative capacity and about 25% lower insulin-stimulated muscle glucose uptake in the older participants. Those findings do not mean your muscle stops responding at 60. In fact, older muscle can still increase GLUT4 and insulin sensitivity with training. The practical meaning is that your glucose clearance reserve may be smaller. You may have less muscle available, fewer highly active fibers, and less metabolic flexibility when you remain still. A younger man may tolerate an inactive afternoon because he has more muscle and a larger physiological margin. At 65, the same meal followed by 3 hours in a chair may expose a weakness that was already developing quietly through inactivity. The answer is not to panic about age. It is to use the tissue you still have while continuing to preserve it through regular resistance and aerobic training. That brings you back to 15 minutes after the meal. Your shoes are on. The curve is rising. Which movement deserves to be the default? Walking has the best combination of applicability, simplicity, and direct evidence. Your pace should feel purposeful. You are not strolling through a museum, but you do not need to gasp, chase a heart rate number, or turn dinner into an athletic event. You should be able to speak in sentences while feeling that your legs are working. A flat route is fine, indoors is fine, a hallway is fine. Consistency matters more than scenery. A controlled crossover study published in 2013 tested inactive adults aged 60 or older who were at risk for impaired glucose tolerance. The participants completed 3 15-minute post-meal walks on one occasion and a single sustained 45-minute walk in the morning or afternoon on other occasions. The total walking time was the same. Both the morning walk and the post-meal walks improved average glucose across 24 hours compared with a control condition. But the short post-meal walks were significantly better at reducing the 3-hour glucose response after dinner than either concentrated 45-minute session. The study involved only 10 people, so it cannot tell us the exact response every older man should expect. Still, it directly tested the decision you were making. Distribute movement around meals or complete the same total duration elsewhere in the day. For the dinner curve, distribution won. Then a longer crossover study followed 64 adults with type 2 diabetes. During one period, they walked briskly for 15 minutes beginning 15 minutes after each main meal. That was roughly 1,500 to 1,600 steps after breakfast, lunch, and dinner. During the comparison period, they performed one continuous 45-minute walk before breakfast. Again, the total prescribed walking time was equal. The post-meal pattern produced greater improvement in the participants' daily glucose profiles and A1C than the concentrated pre-breakfast walk. The study had limitations. It relied on finger stick profiles rather than continuous glucose monitoring, and the crossover did not include a full washout period. Even so, it lasted far longer than a single laboratory meal and tested a routine people could use in ordinary life. This changes the governing question. Exercise duration is not the entire dose. Timing is part of the dose. Your morning workout still matters. It can improve cardiovascular fitness, strength, insulin sensitivity, mood, and long-term health. Do not abandon it because you started walking after dinner. The point is narrower. One morning workout does not necessarily provide the strongest protection against every later meal. For that meal's excursion, muscle contraction near that meal has a direct advantage. Suppose 15 minutes is unavailable. You finished lunch, you have a meeting, and the only free space is a nearby staircase. Stair climbing and descending compresses a substantial muscular demand into a short period. Your calves, quadriceps, hamstrings, and glutes repeatedly lift and control your body weight. That produces more contraction per minute than easy level walking, although it also demands more balance, joint tolerance, and cardiovascular effort. A randomized crossover trial published in 2024 tested 31 apparently healthy young adults after a mixed meal containing 650 calories. The participants either remained seated or climbed and descended stairs at a comfortable pace for 1 minute, 3 minutes, or 10 minutes. Compared with sitting, the change in glucose over the first 30 minutes was about 14 milligrams per deciliter lower after 1 minute and about 18 milligrams per deciliter lower after 3 minutes. The 10-minute condition was also lower than sitting, but by about 10 milligrams per deciliter, so more time did not produce a straight-line improvement in that acute experiment. Do not interpret that as proof that 3 minutes is universally optimal. The participants were young adults, not men over 60, with type 2 diabetes, neuropathy, knee pain, heart disease, or impaired balance. The result shows that a very short stair bout can create a measurable response. It does not give us permission to promise the same numerical drop in an older population. If stairs feel stable and familiar, 1 to 3 comfortable minutes can be your compressed option. Use the handrail. Do not race. If you have balance problems, significant joint pain, foot numbness, unusual shortness of breath, or you have been told to limit stair climbing, choose a safer movement. Intensity is useful only when you can perform it safely and repeat it tomorrow. If outdoor walking is unavailable and stairs are a poor trade-off, the sturdy chair beside you becomes useful. Place it where it cannot slide. Sit toward the front, keep your feet planted, lean forward slightly, stand under control, and sit back down gently. The chair is not there to make the movement look easier. It gives you a consistent depth and a support boundary. Chair squats recruit substantial lower body muscle, particularly the quadriceps and glutes. Repeated sit-to-stand movements have been studied as breaks in prolonged sitting, with some experiments finding improved insulin responses, although glucose findings have not been consistent. We do not have evidence that lets me assign a reliable glucose reduction to one short set of chair squats, or claim that it equals a 15-minute walk. Its role is practical. It transforms an inaccessible walk into repeated contractions across large muscles. Continue at a controlled pace for the short period you have available, and stop before your knees collapse inward, your balance changes, or you have to drop into the chair. The useful dose is one you can perform cleanly. If even that requires too much space, stand behind the chair or at a counter and perform supported calf raises. Keep your toes down, rise through the heels, pause briefly, then lower with control. The support reduces the balance demand while the lower leg contracts repeatedly. Ordinary standing calf raises are not a perfect isolation exercise for the soleus. With the knee relatively straight, the gastrocnemius contributes strongly. That is not a problem. The immediate objective is repeated lower limb contraction and an interruption of stillness, not winning an anatomy argument in your kitchen. Research on simple resistance breaks has combined calf raises with partial squats, knee raises, and glute contractions in adults with type 2 diabetes. Those combined routines can improve post-meal glucose and insulin exposure when they are performed repeatedly during long sitting periods, but there is no honest movement-specific number I can attach to a few supported calf raises by themselves. This is the trade-off you are making. Walking has greater direct confidence. Chair squats and supported calf raises have greater convenience when walking is unavailable. A movement that is somewhat less studied, but actually performed inside the window, may be more useful than the perfect walk you never begin. If you want help building the meal timing side of this into a consistent routine, the Noon Reset Protocol is a 30-day downloadable guide with daily explanations and tracking. It gradually shifts meal timing toward fasting until noon without supplements or calorie counting. It is a one-time download, and the link is below the video. The most tempting seated option still needs to pass a harder test because its published results sound almost too convenient. The soleus is a deep calf muscle that works continuously during standing and walking. It is highly oxidative, meaning it is built to sustain activity for long periods. And although the soleus represents only about 1% of body mass, researchers have found a way to keep its metabolism elevated while a person remains seated. To perform the studied movement, sit with both feet flat and the knees bent. Keep the front of the foot on the floor while raising the heel as high as is comfortable, then allow the heel to lower before repeating the cycle. The motion resembles a seated calf raise, but the laboratory technique was designed to emphasize sustained soleus activity rather than simply bouncing the heels. In a 2022 experiment involving sedentary adults, the soleus push-up protocol reduced the post-meal glucose excursion by about 52% and reduced the accompanying excess insulin response by about 60% during the tested condition. That appears to make it the easiest and strongest choice. You remain seated, use one small muscle, and produce a larger effect than many whole-body interventions. The duration changes the conclusion. Participants were not doing 20 repetitions and returning to stillness. They sustained the contractions during a 3-hour oral glucose tolerance test. The large result came from keeping soleus metabolism elevated for hours. A 2025 pilot study brought the idea closer to the population we care about. It included 10 adults with prediabetes whose average age was 53.3 years. During a 2-hour glucose tolerance test, continuous soleus push-ups reduced the glucose excursion by approximately 32% compared with their sedentary condition. Again, the movement continued for roughly 120 minutes. The reduction emerged from prolonged activity, not from a quick set. So the soleus push-up is not a 2-minute replacement for walking. It is a specialized option when prolonged sitting is unavoidable. If you must spend 2 hours at a desk, in a meeting, or watching a film, sustained seated soleus work may be useful. If you have 15 free minutes and can walk safely, walking remains the better supported default. And, well, there is a useful lesson in that correction. The easiest looking movement may demand the longest exposure. The hardest looking movement may work in only a few minutes, but have less evidence in older adults. You cannot rank these options by intensity alone. You have to rank them by timing, muscle recruitment, practicality, and confidence in the population studied. Your first bout also does not give you metabolic immunity for the rest of the evening. If you walk for 15 minutes and then sit without moving for 4 hours, the initial walk still counts, but you have allowed muscle activity to fall back towards zero. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in 2026 examined more than 50 acute studies of activity breaks during prolonged sitting. On average, short breaks reduced post-meal glucose and insulin exposure compared with uninterrupted sitting. Walking breaks produced the strongest average results, and interruptions every 15 to 20 minutes appeared especially effective. Those were mostly short laboratory experiments, and the average benefit was modest rather than miraculous. A practical home target is to interrupt sitting at least every 30 minutes when possible. Stand, walk briefly, perform controlled chair squats, or use simple supported lower body movements. If every 20 minutes fits naturally during the first part of the post-meal period, that is reasonable too. The primary action is still your movement near 15 minutes. The later interruptions are support, not a second complicated workout plan. If this kind of practical, evidence-checked guidance helps you make better health decisions after 50, I would be grateful if you subscribed. There is one safety condition that can change the protocol. If you use insulin or a medication that stimulates insulin release, including a sulfonylurea, post-meal activity may increase the risk of low blood glucose. Current diabetes guidance recommends individualizing medication, carbohydrate, and activity planning because responses vary with dose, meal size, exercise duration, and starting glucose. Do not change medication on your own to fit a walking routine. Learn your response using the monitoring plan you developed with your diabetes care team and carry the treatment you normally use for a low. A brief moderate walk is not the same glucose challenge as an hour of exercise, but the interaction still matters. Judge the routine by patterns, not one dramatic reading. Compare similar meals, similar starting glucose levels, and similar movement timing across several days. A lower peak is a biomarker improvement. It may help some people avoid the heavy post-meal slump, but the movement studies primarily measured glucose and insulin, not guaranteed energy, weight loss, or disease prevention. That distinction matters over the next decade. Repeated high post-meal glucose exposure is associated with poorer cardiometabolic health, and preserving active muscle supports glucose regulation, strength, walking speed, stairability, and independence. But an acute reduction after one meal does not prove that this protocol prevents a heart attack, a diabetes complication, or any other clinical event. The stronger long-term strategy combines the immediate habit with muscle preservation. Post-meal movement uses the muscle you have today. Regular resistance training helps preserve or build the glucose disposal tissue you will need at 70. Aerobic training improves cardiovascular capacity and insulin sensitivity beyond the meal window. Food quality and portion size determine how large a challenge arrives in the first place. At your next meal, make the decision simple. Note your last bite. Around 15 minutes later, take a purposeful 15-minute walk when you can. If time is compressed and stairs are safe for you, use 1 to 3 comfortable minutes while remembering that the numerical stair results came from young adults. If walking and stairs are unavailable, use the chair for controlled sit-to-stands or the counter for supported calf raises. Treat them as contraction-based fallbacks, not as movements with a guaranteed glucose number. If you must remain seated for a long stretch, use sustained soleus push-ups for the use case actually studied, prolonged activity, not a handful of repetitions. Then avoid disappearing into the chair for the remainder of the evening. Give your legs another brief job at least every 30 minutes when practical. Those 30 minutes do not decide your destiny. They decide whether the rising glucose curve meets inactive muscle or contracting muscle. After 60, the best movement is not the hardest one you can perform later. It is the one you can begin before the peak.